Hey guys, this is Brian Matz, RenTurfMechanic.com. Today I want to scalp some Bermuda grass and answer a good handful of questions that you and others might have, things that most people don't even think to ask. Now the funny thing about this video is I live in cold season territory. It's like 35 degrees outside right now. I don't have Bermuda grass in my lawn, but I do manage this pot. So to help illustrate this whole process, I'm definitely going to be scalping this pot, but I'm also going to be consulting the help of a friend of mine who does run a Bermuda grass lawn in the transition zone. We're going to get to him in a minute, so make sure to stick around. First though, let's talk briefly about Bermuda and some of its characteristics, some of the reasons why scalping is important. First of all, Bermuda grass is one of the most heat-tolerant turf grasses of them all. And that's why it's typically grown in the, let's call it the southern transition zone, and the south, where it actually gets particularly hot. Bermuda grass is one of those grass types, depending on where you live, where it might not go dormant at all. It's got extremely deep roots, therefore it can reach water that other grass types can't. And because that root system goes so deep, it can tolerate extreme heat, especially when the sun is baking the uppermost layer of your topsoil. Also well known is Bermuda grass, especially in the transition zone, goes dormant for a good chunk of the year. And that's because as soil temperatures drop into the 50s, it goes brown. All of the energy in this plant, all of the carbohydrates, everything goes down into the root system. It essentially dies on top. Now I promise you, all of this does play into the concept of scalping Bermuda grass. You just need to understand a couple of these fundamental concepts first. Everybody knows that Bermuda grass is robust, it spreads vigorously. In some lawns it kind of spreads at an uncontrollable pace and people are dealing with it almost like a problem. But it is not shade tolerant. So if this was a warm season lawn, it might grow really well over here in full sun, but once you get under the shade of a tree, it doesn't do so hot. If you seed it or sod it under a tree, it might look good for a while, but over time it will become thinner and thinner and thinner. And for similar reasons, if you live in a transition zone or even up north and you're trying to put Bermuda in, it's not going to do so well simply because there's fewer sunlight hours, especially during the cooler time of the year between October and March. If you happen to live up north in an area that doesn't really get very cold during the winter, say for instance the I-5 corridor in Oregon. I live in Oregon, so I know this area. It doesn't really get that cold there. But there's so many fewer hours during the day during those winter months that even if the grass doesn't experience extreme cold overnight temperatures, it still doesn't really like to grow there. As an example, on December 20th, winter solstice, in Dallas, Texas, you're looking at about 10 hours of sunlight on the shortest day of the year. However, if you go up to Seattle, you're getting about 8.5 hours. Here where I live, we get about 9 hours on the dot. It's significantly less than a place further south. And although it's just 1 to 1.5 hours difference, it makes a big difference to this grass type. As you travel north, the amount of sunlight available to a Bermuda grass lawn, or any lawn for that matter, drastically shrinks after the fall equinox. So if you do happen to live in a northern location that doesn't really go freezing over the course of the winter, this grass type is still not really going to want to live there because for 6 months out of the year, there's just significantly less light available, even in full sun locations. Not only that, but the sun is not coming straight down on the grass. It's really coming in on a shallow angle. Now, like I said, my pot of Bermuda grass here has been limping through the winter, really for that reason. Although I've been keeping it inside the house, it's plenty warm enough in that 75-degree range when it's sitting in the windowsill. It's just not getting enough sun, and that's why you're seeing dappled dormancy and dappled green. The soil temperature is right, but there's just not enough sun. It's kind of like I'm growing this grass in the shade. It doesn't like it. Now by spring, there's a lot more daylight than there is during the winter months or even the late fall. In fact, throughout spring, the minutes increase to the point where I live where we get roughly 15.5 hours of daylight. Plenty of daylight for this grass type. And because there's so much sunlight coming, it makes sense to start talking about scalping this grass now. And once we really start talking about scalping, then we really have to start addressing the brown. In a true Bermuda dormancy scenario, soil temperatures are going to drop, let's call it into the 40s. Everything in the Bermuda lawn is going to go brown. Now here I've got green, but if the entire thing was brown, then that means all of the energy is reserved in the root system of the plant. Everything up top is basically dead. It's very similar to the way a bulb plant works. A bulb plant in the spring starts putting up flowers and shoots, and by the time fall rolls around, most of that stuff is dried up and it's dead, and all of the energy has gone back into the bulb, which resides under the ground. It just sits there for the whole course of the winter. By spring, everything starts shooting up again. That's the same way that Bermuda works, except for there's no bulb in the ground. Once the soil temperatures start coming back up again, then the root system of this plant is going to want to start putting on new top growth, and it's going to want to put on new horizontal growth, stolons and rhizomes. But at the end of winter and the early part of spring, we're still dealing with light, especially if there's a lot of brown dead material on the top, because new shoots are way down at the soil surface. They're still being shaded by the dead material on top. If you leave all that dead material on top, eventually everything's going to come through and start growing, but it's really going to be stunted. When we scalp all of the dead material off of the top, it's instantly going to allow all of the sun to go all the way down to the soil surface. So it's going to be able to hit those brand new green shoots and photosynthesize better. It's going to be able to start growing quicker and more vigorously. That sun is also going to be hitting the soil, warming it up more. And as we know about Bermudagrass, it likes heat. So if your soil temperature is 55 to 60 degrees, it doesn't really like it. It doesn't want to grow. But if that sun hits the soil and warms it up to 65, 70, it's gonna start growing much faster. In essence, a scalped Bermuda lawn, it's going to extend the growing season by a few weeks. In my opinion, this makes Bermudagrass a very unique turfgrass variety, because although you can cut other turf grasses low, they don't really act the same way that Bermuda does. Now, as I'm recording this, it's mid-March. We're getting here where I live about 11.5 hours of sun every day. That amount of sun is going to increase to over 15 hours over the next 3 months. And because I'm keeping this inside the house in my windowsill, it's getting a relatively constant 78 to 80 degrees throughout the day. In my opinion, it's time for me to scalp my Bermudagrass pot and see how quickly this pot starts growing vigorously. Now, because I run in my actual real lawn a cool season grass, because I live in cold territory, I've never actually physically scalped a warm season Bermudagrass lawn with a lawnmower before. So I decided to ask my good friend Chuck onto this channel to answer some of the common questions people have about actually scalping real lawns. Chuck runs the channel Dadding All Day. It's a channel where he's been documenting since around 2018 his journey with Bermudagrass and fescue. He's got roughly 3,000 square feet of Bermudagrass, and they kind of battle back and forth, which makes, in my opinion, his channel pretty interesting. He's got experience with this grass type and has scalped it numerous times before. So I wanted to ask his opinion about his experiences doing this in a real lawn scenario. So with that said, Chuck, wherever you are, I don't know, are you up in the sky? Do you have a minute to answer a few questions? Wherever you are.
Hey Brian, Chuck here, and I hope that you and your audience are having a fantastic day today. How can I help you today?
The thing is, I've never actually scalped Bermudagrass before, so I thought you could answer maybe a couple questions for me. The first question I really had to do with timing. How do we know when we're getting the timing right, and is it that big of a deal if we do it too early versus too late?
So timing is everything. Ideally, you're going to scalp your Bermuda after the threat of frost and freeze has passed. Here in East Tennessee, I'm looking at late March, early April. Don't be fooled by the weather, because here the last several days, we've been in the 60s and 70s. It has been absolutely gorgeous. I've been tempted to scalp, but the next week we have a couple days in the 40s and 50s with lows in the mid to lower 20s. So we are not out of that threat yet. Now, when you do your last mow in the fall, and whatever that height of cut looks like, you're actually leaving a layer of protection. That canopy is going to insulate the soil, which is also going to protect the roots from all the cold weather, because we all know Bermuda does not like cold. So if you scalp too early, you're removing that layer of protection, that insulation from the cold temperatures, and then you get a frost or freeze that could do a little bit of damage to the root zone. As far as doing it too late, there are a lot of people that will do a summer height of cut reset, and so they'll scalp in the middle of the growing season, but because Bermuda loves the warm temperatures, you give it some fertilizer, something real heavy like an ammonium sulfate or something like that, give it some water, and it's going to bounce back big time and recover from that scalp. So if you wait too long to do your scalp, it's really not the end of the world, because you're in the growing season, and Bermuda is so hardy that it can handle a scalp later in the season.
All right, that makes some sense, thank you. But what about depth of cut or depth of scalp? Should we cut it all the way down as low as we possibly can, or should we just cut it a little bit lower than we normally do? And then what about cutting it too low? Is that a possibility?
The question shouldn't be should you go low, it's how low can you go. For Bermuda, for your scalp, you want to crank your mower down. And that basically means for all of the people, all of us with a rotary mower, whatever that lowest setting is, it doesn't matter, put it at its lowest setting and go to scalping. For those of us with a real mower, you can obviously go lower than a normal rotary mower can go. And so I do have a real mower, and during the growing season, I'm usually cutting the Bermuda at 3/4 of an inch to an inch. So my scalp, I'm actually gonna go to 1/2 an inch, and that will get all that material out of the way and get things rocking. So go as low as your mower can go. From all the research that I've done, there really isn't a worry about cutting back too much. Even in situations where, say, you actually cut into the dirt with, whether it's with a rotary mower or your real mower, Bermuda and zoysia are like the only two grass types that can really handle that kind of aggressive mowing. And with a little bit of fertilizer, like I mentioned earlier, like real heavy nitrogen based, some water and the warmer temperatures, it's gonna fill in any dirt spots that you create because you maybe went a little bit too crazy with the scalp. So there really isn't a fear if you were to, say, cut it too much. The purpose of scalping is actually to get rid of all that dead material, because like you said earlier in the video, dormant Bermuda, everything above the soil level is dead. It's everything that's underneath the soil that's still alive. So the root zone is still going. So getting rid of all that dead material on top is basically what you're looking to do, because you want that sun, you want the warm air to get to the soil level. So if you don't bag or you leave too much, you're not really doing the purpose of a scalp, which is to get all that stuff out of the way, expose some of the ground, so that way the warm air, warm temperatures can get down to the soil.
All right, so here's a couple more questions that I had. So in the transition zone, it's pretty common to have Bermuda mixed with other things. Fescue is quite common. You have fescue in your lawn. What are your thoughts on scalping these mixed variety lawns? And honestly, are there other times of the year that it's acceptable to scalp, in your opinion?
That there, my friend, is $1 million question. It all comes down to which grass type do you want to be dominant. Now, yes, Bermuda thrives in the summer, but fescue can actually still do really well in the hot summer months. Here in East Tennessee, I'm able to keep my fescue green year around. So if you do want Bermuda, go ahead and do a spring scalp like we've talked about, because fescue does not like being mowed that short, and so you're going to stunt the fescue, maybe even hurt a little bit, maybe cause a little bit of death. I honestly don't know how far that goes, but doesn't like being mowed that short. So that will then activate the Bermuda, wake the Bermuda up, and get it doing its job, which is spreading and just filling in all the areas, and it will eventually overtake the fescue. Whereas if you want a fescue lawn, don't do a scalp. Keep the lawn cut tall, because even though Bermuda can be cut tall, it doesn't really like being cut above 2 inches, definitely not 4 inches. So cutting it tall doesn't mean it's going to eliminate the Bermuda, but it'll definitely slow it down, because it can't send its energy out to spread, because it has to send its energy going up to try to reach up above the canopy to get some sunlight. So it all depends which type of grass you want. So there are people that believe in doing an end of season scalp. So when the soil temperatures are going to start dipping back into the 50s, they're going to go ahead and scalp the lawn. And the contention whether or not this is a good idea is because when we do our last mow at the end of the season, you're leaving that top layer, you're leaving that growth, that canopy, to insulate and protect the soil and the root zone from the cold temperatures, especially that we get here in the transition zone where we can still get snow, we get good frost, heavy freezes. Removing that protection exposes your root zone to those temperatures, which is what Bermuda doesn't like. Now, these people that do that, they still end up having really nice lawns coming out of winter dormancy, so whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea, it seems like it's okay. I personally believe in that last mow at the end of the season, maybe go a notch taller than you would normally go to just make sure you give that layer of protection during the cold winter months.
With a general understanding here of how to scalp the lawn, what kind of time and effort requirement is there going to be for the typical lawn owner?
I mean, it really depends. If you're just doing 1,000 square feet and you're bagging like you're supposed to, so you're collecting all the clippings, you're probably going to end up having to do multiple trips to dump your bag. You're looking at a good couple hours of work. I have 3,000 square feet in the backyard, and to scalp that whole, oh, and there's a hill. So I'm also going slower because I don't want to do anything that's going to damage the mower. So I'm making sure I pick up any heavy debris that could damage my blade or anything like that. So you're looking at a good couple hours of work for your spring scalp.
All right, so assuming that a Bermuda lawn owner decides to actually go ahead and scalp their lawn, are there any ninja tips that you have to kind of make the process a little bit easier? And what about things that you can do around the scalping time that are beneficial, like leveling, aeration, or any other sort of lawn applications?
I wouldn't do any leveling right away, mainly because, similar with cool season grasses, when you do your leveling, you want to make sure that your grass is actively growing. And so when you do your scalp, your Bermuda isn't actively growing yet. It will be shortly, but right there, it is still technically dormant. So especially if you do, get a little bit heavier in the sand in some spots, it may not have enough to actually break through that layer of sand that you've applied. So I'd wait just a little bit until the Bermuda is actively growing before you think about leveling your lawn. I actually think aerating right after your scalp is a really good idea. Now that you've exposed that soil, similar to if you did a fall overseed with your cool season grass, you want to mow it down a little bit more before you go ahead and do any dethatching or aerating. Since you've done that scalp, aerating is probably a really good idea because now that you've exposed that soil layer a little bit, getting some cores out of there, allowing some air, water, nutrients to get down to the root zone is probably a really good thing to add right after you do your scalp. Not 100% necessary, but it's a good idea. Now, this really isn't a ninja tip. It's just go into it with joy. Look, we've been inside, unless you're like me and you have really nice temperatures right now, we've been inside all winter long. So we're looking at several months being inside, not being able to enjoy the mow, enjoy working out in the lawn. So take this opportunity, working in the lawn anyway for a few hours, put on some good music, put on a podcast, but just go into it and have fun because now you're starting to kick off your lawn season. So you're gonna have a lot of fun here. So just go into it with joy.
All right, so what about those Bermuda lawns that were overseeded by rye or with ryegrass for winter color? In your opinion, does that change the scalping procedure in any way?
Not at all, unless you're wanting to enjoy that nice deep green that you get from that ryegrass that you've overseeded in the fall and winter months. Scalping is actually a really good way to start transitioning out of the ryegrass into the Bermuda, because yes, rye does like being cut short, but typically speaking, when you're doing your scalping for your Bermuda, the temperatures are starting to rise and ryegrass does not like the hot temperatures. So between the rise in temperatures, the scalping, and the fertilization, it's actually a good way to start transitioning out that rye, letting the Bermudagrass start to dominate. And then people also can still do like a kill off and smoke out the ryegrass with chemicals, because if the Bermuda is dormant, you can actually apply glyphosate to it and it won't damage the existing Bermuda as long as it's fully dormant. So scalping it really is actually a good way to sort of get that process to move along.
All right, Chuck, now I know that you are the first to admit that you're not an expert, but just a really well-experienced Bermuda lawn owner. I appreciate your opinion a lot, and I know a lot of other people out there probably do as well. What is your thoughts on not scalping Bermuda lawns at the very end of winter going into spring? In your opinion, is it necessary, or can you actually have a pretty good looking lawn without doing this?
The cool thing is, like a lot of things with lawn care, a spring scalp isn't fully necessary, right? You can have a nice Bermuda lawn that's green and lush and thick without that spring scalp. The big thing that you need to think about is that your lawn is going to green up a lot slower than a lawn that did have a spring scalp. because that grass on the top that you're looking at, that brown grass, that is dead. So all the new growth has to come up from the ground through all that dead material, and that dead material is still there. Now it will naturally just sort of break down and go away with mowing and everything else, but it's going to take a while for that brown grass to go away and that green grass to start to grow. So that's the biggest thing you need to think about, but you don't need to do a spring scalp.
All right, I want to send out a huge thanks to Chuck for being a part of this video and answering all of these tons of these random questions all about Bermuda scalping. If you are unfamiliar with his channel, please go take a look at it. I'm linking to it kind of in one of these end screen areas from this video, as well as in the description and probably the pinned comment. In fact, he's got more content on the scalping process on his channel from the 2022 season. So if you have a Bermuda lawn, he should be a great resource for you. Now, as you saw earlier in this video, my scalped Bermuda pot has most likely come in. Now, I'm filming this before it comes in, but I'm pretty sure it's going to come in great. So hopefully you saw the transformation at some point throughout this video. And because I'm publishing this in the month of March, the best time to seed Bermuda lawns, or sod really, is probably a little bit mid-spring, mid to late spring. I've got a video about the seeding process that I did and growing warm season grasses from seed, which I'm also going to link to here in this corner at the end of this video. All of the questions, plus probably a few more that were addressed in this video, I have written out on the Turf Mechanic website. If you'd like to see that link is in the description below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you are going into spring, I hope that you have the best spring in your lawn that you've ever had.